Okay, now I want to cover a game between Capablanca and Mattison, played in Carlsbad, 1920. The opening was a Nimzo Indian, ECO code E38. The game started out by d4. Then black played knight f6, basically preventing e4, and also saying that I plan to control the center with pieces first and not with pawns, unlike the d5, which says I plan to keep a pawn in the center to control the center. White plays c4, so preparing to play knight to c3, and this pawn controls the d5 square. Black plays e6, basically freeing this bishop and helping to control the d5 square. White plays knight c3, developing a piece and contesting mainly the e4 square. And then black plays bishop b4, pinning the knight, and now black controls e4 square. This is the typical setup. This is known as the Nimzo Indian. So how does white proceed? Well, there's two main moves. There's queen to c2, which is the classical line, and there's e3, which is known as the Rubinstein variation here. White plays queen to c2, the classical, or actually I think it's also known as the Capablanca variation. So good news that Capablanca is playing white. And now black will play c5, but the other popular move for black is the castle, and then play would normally continue a3, b takes, c3 check, queen takes c3. So maybe I should back up and say the idea behind queen to c2 is that when black captures this knight here, that white plans on recapturing with the queen, keeping the pawn structure intact. So, and one of the ideas in the Nimzo Indian for black is that, well, if you were black, you'd want to, if you were to happen to take this knight, you'd like to disrupt black's pawn structure and give them a weakness. But the Capablanca variation, or the classical variation, the queen is moved to c2 so that the queen can recapture. And now the queen does have to move, so black does get a sort of an advantage maybe in development, because the queen has to move more than once. So those are some of the underlying ideas. But now black did play c5, basically attacking the center with a pawn, also opening up a diagonal for the queen here. And then white plays d takes c5. The idea behind this is that white knows that black's going to have to use a move to capture the pawn, so the move to capture the pawn is not wasted. And two, white is planning that it can utilize this half-open file against black, and that one, it will be a half-open file, and two, that hopefully it can keep this pawn here backwards where it can be attacked, and maybe white can win a pawn. So those are the ideas, because it seems like, why would you take a flank pawn with a center pawn? Well, that's the reason why. Black plays knight to c6. Black isn't in a real hurry to recapture the pawn with the bishops, because the only move that white really had to defend this pawn here is to play something like bishop to e3, which doesn't look very attractive. So black decides to develop a piece. Now white plays knight to f3 to counter black's knight or move of knight to c6. Now the bishop takes the pawn. The reason, I think the main reason that black takes the pawn is that white now has the move bishop to g5 pinning, and if white decides to pin the knight, that black can just drop the bishop back to e7 and break the pin. It was technically, if you go back to this position, white could have played bishop to g5, but then this knight can always come in to d4, so that's why white played. One of the reasons why I think white played knight to f3, not only to prevent the knight from coming to a centralized square, but also help to control the central square. So bishop takes. Now white plays bishop to f4. Normally white develops the bishop to g5, but it looks like Capablanca's idea was to help one, I guess, have control the e5 square, but then to have influence over the these two other squares, the d6 and the c7 square. Now white decides to play d5. Obviously not really attacking this pawn on c4, but really going after the e4 square. So now it's white who has control once again over the e4 square. So you can see the two sides battling for the control of the center. White plays e3. Obviously it's helping to control this square, and if black decides to capture, then the bishop can just recapture. Queen to a5. Now black plays queen to e5 with the idea of disrupting the pawn structure. Black's idea now looks like it's going to play bishop to b4, take the knight, and then that's going to force white to recapture. Oops, not what I wanted to do, but recapture with the pawn, giving it double pawns and creating a pawn weakness. So once again, black's going to give up the black bishop. It wants some type of pawn weakness on white's part. So now white plays bishop to e2. And the reason that white did not play the bishop to d3 is that black would just play the move knight to b4, attacking queen and bishop, forcing the queen to move. The knight takes the bishop, and then white's been deprived of one of its best attackers, the white squared bishop. So the bishop is developed and prepares white for castling. Black plays bishop to b4, continuing with its plan. White castles. Black takes. Now white's takes back with a pawn, so black got its goal. The bishop's gone, but white now has doubled pawns, and I guess technically split pawns too. But for that, if you look at this position, white is fully developed. Okay, so white has some doubled pawns, and but white is fully developed. The king is castled, and if you look at black, black has not castled, not fully developed. It looks like, black has two moves behind, the castling and the movement of the bishop. And the reason where it lost two moves is because it moved the bishop so many times. Remember, the bishop first was developed to b4, captured, came back to b4, then captured again. That's 4 bishop moves, and white only made 2 moves. It developed the knight and then captured with a pawn, so that's where the 2 moves came from. So now black needs to sort of catch up to white, but white plans to exploit this. So, but it's black's move, so black castles. Now it's really only 1 move behind. But now white plans to capitalize on its sort of 1 move advantage. And white plays rook on a to b1. You could say, well, white's just bringing its rook to a half-open file, but what it's really doing is that this bishop here is defending this pawn. So black's going to have to solve the problem of how's it going to defend this pawn if the bishop moves. So what's really white's done is tied down this bishop from developing. And if this bishop can't develop, then the rooks can't connect and come to maybe open or central file. So it's sort of, this move is really tying up black from developing, not really attacking this pawn. So, I mean, if you don't know, if black could just move this pawn without any consequences, then, you know, you could almost say white's move is almost wasted because the rook would be headed down a file, which isn't really useful. I'm going to have to continue this game on the next video.